Hello and welcome to the 23rd and final hour of ID24 November 2017. ID24 is brought to you by the Paciello Group with kind support from Barclays and the Centre for Inclusive Design, and you can find out more about those organisations on our website. If you like this session, as usual, please hit that like button and subscribe to the ID24 channel for future events, streams and videos. We are planning to do a lot more, and subscribing is the best way to find out about them. Don't forget to send questions for presenters by tweeting to the hashtag ID24. We'll pass these questions on to Amy at the end of her presentation. And for the best question or best comment, you will receive a free 90-day JAWS license. Just a note to say that the YouTube chat is open, but we are not monitoring it for questions to our presenter. It's just there so you can chat with other participants and share info. And with that said, I will hand you over to our final speaker, who is Amy Carney, presenting on the subject of 100 days of accessibility. Over to you, Amy.
Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. Just a little bit about myself. As you said, my name is Amy Carney. I'm the publications specialist for the Alaska State Libraries, Archives, and Museums here in Juneau, Alaska. In short, I do web stuff most of the time, and the rest of the time I design publications like brochures and bookmarks. I used to be a librarian, but for the last 4 years, I've been a web designer, falling headfirst down that rabbit hole. Today I'm very excited to be a part of the ID24 conversation this year. As the last speaker of our virtual conference, I hope to leave you with the encouragement that everyday people are the ones advocating for web accessibility, and it's the team effort that makes progress. To all who have presented in the last 24 hours, thank you so much for contributing to the team effort. So to start, a little bit of background about the journey I'm about to share with you. 2017 has been a year of leveling up for me personally as a web designer. I kicked off the year with Alexander Calloway's 100 Days of Code challenge because I was determined to program more and be a better developer. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with this challenge that's been going on for the last few years, Alexander invited people of all coding abilities to commit to 100 days to coding projects in order to improve their coding skills. It was his own personal challenge, which he extended to the public. And I think that he's gotten several hundred people involved with it. Some people are even up to round 3 of their 100 days of code. Roughly around the same time, Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, had convinced me that a lot can be learned and accomplished through dedicated focus, time, and commitment. After completing 100 days of code, that logic for me was sealed. I had learned quite a bit of Ruby and JavaScript, tried new coding ideas at work, and contributed for the first time to open source coding projects on GitHub. It felt really good to be finally getting somewhere, and I wanted to keep the momentum going. So that's when I got the idea. What if I repeated my 100-day challenge, but with a different focus? What if I knocked out another topic in web design that I'd been meaning to learn for the last 4 years, but didn't quite get around to? That focus being accessibility. It was a win-win situation, right? Because I would continue improving as a web designer, as well as making websites and online content more accessible to more people on the web. And so hashtag 100 days of A11y was born. As an informational note, A11y is short for accessibility. The number 11 standing in for the letters in between the first and the last letters. It's often used as an accessibility topic flag on Twitter in the days when we only had 140 characters. Though on May 1st, 2017, my journey began. Since I was making this up as I went, I set forth some guidelines and goals for the next 100 days. My 5 guidelines, also similar to those of the 100 Days of Code challenge, included setting aside at least 1 hour a day for the next 100 days to learn about web accessibility and find ways to apply what I learned. Each day, I would tweet about my progress during the 100 days of accessibility and include the new hashtag that I made. I would log my time spent, as well as what I learned and when or how I had applied it. Presumably, I would do this through weekly blog posts. My time well spent on reading or practicing accessibility principles would count towards that day. But I would allow myself some flexibility in my human life and could skip one day every 2 weeks if I needed, but that day could not count towards logging of my 100 days. So the goals I set out for myself were meant to be loose, mostly learning strategies, since I already felt completely lost about where to begin and just needed a starting point to get going. In the end, my list boiled down to the fact that I wanted to read a lot, run through tutorials, and hopefully take action through what I had learned and read. Over the past year or 2 or 3, I'd already gathered links and resources that applied to the idea of me adding to my knowledge base. I wanted to read several books that I gathered that directly spoke about accessibility or taught about good design and development practice that benefit everyone. Books I had initially slated on my reading list and documentation I wanted to read on the web included Hayden Pickering books, Inclusive Design Patterns and Apps for All, The Filament Group's Designing with Progressive Enhancement, the World Wide Web Consortium's Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, as well as the Web Accessibility Initiative, Accessible Rich Internet Applications, which most of us here is ARIA. I also wanted to get into reading the actual US laws like the Americans with Disability Act, especially sections 504 and 508. And any other documentation that I could find, especially about CSS Grid with that on the horizon, which even more so now, it seems like it's really taken a push. And I wanted to see what talk was being made about how accessible that was. To learn with a more interactive approach, I wanted to complete online coursework and tutorials. Southampton's digital accessibility course, hosted on FutureLearn, offered 5 weeks of bite-sized information about web and document accessibility and an understanding of the challenges faced by people with disabilities or using assistive technology. So that seemed like a perfect fit. The World Wide Web Consortium had always come up as a resource recommended to me, especially when it came to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And it looked like their site had gone through quite a transformation over the last few years. So I was very excited to try out their new tutorials, which appeared to include friendly examples as well. Additionally, I was determined to finally dig into ARIA and learn about web application accessibility. And of course, after all my reading and learning, I had some plans to take action initially. My big hope was to update many of my coding projects to be accessible. So those projects that I had worked on through 100 Days of Code, through Free Code Camp, I wanted to go back and review and see how good or bad I had done and what things that I could make better. I also wanted to find out about the state of Alaska's compliance. I know the goal in past years had been for WCAG AA compliance, and I wanted to talk to people and see how we were doing on that, especially with a new look and feel on the horizon for our websites. Finally, I wanted to teach my coworkers about digital accessibility in hopefully less than an hour. After being exposed to the digital accessibility course online, I was hoping that I would be able to take some of those concepts and bring them to my coworkers. So whatever content I would receive from them, they would have taken the step before to make sure that that PDF was accessible, that the writing was accessible, written in plain language for people to understand and not too wordy. So different things like that. And that way it would take one less pressure off of me to have to review everything before it got posted on the web. So after my planning and goals and guidelines, I thought a tentative roadmap might help keep me going. As I said, I was making everything up as I go, and so maybe if I had a weekly plan, I could stick to it and feel like I was really making progress and look back engaged, like, yes, I did all of these things. So weeks 1 through 5, I wanted to go ahead and tackle that 5-week Southampton course, Digital Accessibility, on FutureLearn. Week 6 through 7, I wanted to start working through some of W3C's guided tutorials and read through their documentation. I had never actually sat and read WCAG 2.0. And this sounded like a really good time to do it, because all those ideas were just floating around of, well, I know it needs to be keyboard accessible, something about color contrast. I should really look into this. And so I didn't have any more excuses now. This challenge was going to make me do that. Week 8 was when I was going to start looking over my projects again and also start Pickering's Apps for All book. The second half of the challenge, by the way, this challenge, 100 days, is about equivalent to 15 weeks from what I found from my coding challenge. So week 9 through 10, I was going to read inclusive design patterns. Week 11 through 13, I would read designing with progressive enhancement. Week 14, as I was approaching the end, this would be the time I needed to start taking action and practicing things. So I was going to look at attempting an accessibility audit for work, and that specifically just for pages I worked on, not a whole state of Alaska thing. I can't even imagine. But just to start looking at pages that I was maintaining and editing and creating. And the last week was time to start making that lesson plan for my coworkers. Well, just forget any of this itinerary plan that you just saw, because I pretty much went with the flow of what I was learning and ideas that I had chased to get a better understanding of what I was learning. But I did refer back to my blog post every few weeks to see if I still needed to pull from these resources. By the way, my blog, as I'll mention at the end of my slideshow, is carneydevelopit.wordpress.com, and you can find my blog posts of when I first initiated the challenge, and it lists all my goals and guidelines on there. So what really happened? What did I actually do? Well, I pretty much stuck to the read and learn and take action progress. I felt like most of my time was reading, because I was always grasping at straws, trying to find that magical, perfect checklist of what I need to be doing and where am I going wrong, and am I being sensitive or empathetic enough? Am I understanding all the people groups and the types of challenges that people experience and the different types of assistive technology? Am I considering all of those things? So reading reading, lots of reading. And if any of you followed my tweets on Twitter or go back and look at my tweets by searching 100 Days of Accessibility, you will see a lot of tweeting about reading and tutorials. So I did end up reading Hayden's books. Hayden, thank you for your books. I think these really kicked it off for me. Inclusive Design Patterns really had a lot of great resources at the end that helped me find people on Twitter. He gave me new ways to think about my semantic HTML and what should and shouldn't be nested in each other. And so much has changed in web design over the last couple of decades. It just made me realize, wow, this is so complicated, and it seemed so easy back in the late 90s. And now I'm considering more web applications and interactive things for people. And now other people are being shut out. So that gave me a lot to think about. I'm glad I bought that one, because I still sometimes look back at some of the patterns that he created to give me examples. I needed examples too, and that's what I appreciated. I'm almost embarrassed to admit that I finally just now got around to reading Designing with Web Standards. That happened in my challenge. I think because it was referred to in some other resources, maybe even in Hayden's books. There were things that felt outdated, of course, but at the same time, it filled in gaps to my knowledge. And this book, my takeaway, I'm grateful that I read it, because HTML people, I cannot say enough. Learning HTML makes things accessible. It makes things easier for you. And I felt like somebody was already saying this message over and over again. And I felt like this is the message I needed to carry, and personal practice that I needed to constantly work on. Here I had been working so hard to learn JavaScript and all the neat things you can do with it. And these two, Zeldman and Marcotte, brought me back of like, don't forget the basics. You need your foundation first. So I also read Responsible Responsive Design by Scott Gell. And this was nice too, because he again was promoting the idea of being responsible about what we put out there. This isn't just for us or for the people who we're making these pages for, as far as companies or nonprofits. We are putting things out there for real people, and everybody needs to be able to access those things. I have found that a lot of book apart books have been really helpful over time. I'm still reading those and catching up. So I would recommend any of those books as well, because they get back to basics and they encourage a strong message of the right thing to do and how to do them in a small package. And you'll find too, when you're reading, that they always have resource lists at the end. And I did also get around to reading the US law, Americans with Disability Act, and the WCAG 2.0 and why ARIA documentation. I feel kind of proud of myself for getting through those. They weren't actually as bad as I thought they would be. It feels intimidating when you first go to those pages. But I think because the design has improved over time, it felt a little more welcoming this year than in past years. And because I was on this course to learn what I could and to actually read checklists, albeit longer, these were at the top of my list. So I was determined to read through those, and I'm glad I did. In between reading, I did follow through with interactive learning. I completed the digital accessibility course. I watched videos on YouTube. The videos on YouTube was just random searches about disabilities, trying to specifically find people telling their stories about what it was like having a disability and the barriers that they encountered, especially using computers, examples of them using assistive technology. And so as far as taking action after my reading and learning, some of the things that I did do was probably started off talking a lot about it. Just ask some of my coworkers, actually, and some of the people who follow me. I tweeted about it. I talked to my boss about it. As things arose that came up as flags in my mind through the things I was learning, I would point that out to coworkers and say, hey, we need to consider this, and give them the reason why and a good example. I also started planning to bring information to others in a more digestible way and context that they were familiar with, and to go more in detail about what I feel accomplished about this journey and this experiment is that I did learn a lot. I don't quite feel like I'm drowning in the ocean as I once did before. Beforehand, it was always, where do I begin and what am I missing? And just trying to get those little pieces in there, feeling like I was making headway and improving things for people. I'm also feel like I have a better understanding of US law because our state government here in Alaska does respect Section 508 of the ADA. And so first and foremost, I wanted to make sure that I was at least familiar with it. Even though I definitely supported WCAG through all the different efforts that they had made, I wanted to make sure that I was falling in line with US law, which, by the way, that is pretty dry reading, but it is possible to get through it. I found out that I know more of WCAG than I thought I did, but through reading the documentation, I was able to fill in those gaps. And I became more familiar with ARIA before it was a distant concept and just something I had heard of. And there's still a lot more I need to practice with ARIA. But I was able to read through some of that documentation too, and understand the different parts of ARIA, like roles. I also broadened my view of assistive technologies. By the way, AT is so much more than screen readers. That's at the forefront of our minds when we think of assistive technology. But I felt like I was finally able to broaden my view a little bit by learning from different YouTube videos and the digital accessibility course that brought up some of the different barriers that people have. Switch access being only a vague acknowledgement in my past and experience, but now I feel like that's a little more prominent. That's something that I need to start testing for and consider what that's like for people. And I think there was actually a talk on here about switch access earlier in these sessions. So that's one that I'm going to go back and watch. And if you don't know much about switch access, you should watch it too. I also broadened my original view from creating accessible web pages for people with specific disabilities. So trying to target like, okay, is this going to work for somebody with a vision impairment? Is this going to work for somebody with a hearing impairment, or motor problems? And instead, I started evolving my thinking through all the different reading that I was doing in books and online, and thinking of it more as inclusive. So I wasn't just striving for accessible web pages, but I wanted to strive for more inclusive web pages, because you start to acknowledge that accessibility definitely benefits everyone. So when I started thinking of it as an inclusive design, then that helped me embrace the idea better instead of working on a checklist like, okay, I think I'm meeting the needs of certain people. Some of the more tangible things that happened for me was initiating a conversation with our state's Office of Information Technology, and therefore unwittingly starting a web accessibility working group for the state of Alaska. That's been really great for me because I have people to talk to, bounce ideas off of, find out what they're doing in their departments, feeling like I'm not the only one who cares about this, and feel like we are going to be able to make plans together to move forward to make all of our state pages rise up to a certain level for all our users. Because I think state government should have a higher bar since we are serving all people. I also started planning out development of an online coding tutorial about ARIA for developers. I haven't gotten very far on that yet, but that was definitely whimsical for my wish list and something I started playing around with because I felt like I didn't really find anything for ARIA online that I could really just practice. And I know there's things you have to think about. And I've been following a listserv on email for, I forget which one it is, but they have a lot of accessibility conversation. And I learned through that, but I thought it would be really great if somebody for web developers and web designers had something where we could go through and check like, oh, you forgot to try a role and now practice putting these roles. Now practice changing these states. And so it's a bit of a lofty goal, especially for someone who's still working on her programming skills, but maybe someday that'll get out there. I also started planning out training for coworkers to teach about accessible content, documents, and web design. I've started outlining that and have had the pleasure of actually doing some one-on-one training with people already. I like those the best, actually, but I think it'll be more efficient to be able to get certain people grouped together, like some of my content creators and some of the other editors, and talk to them about something specific to their job and helping them get on board of let's all work as a team to make this accessible and not have it all land on my shoulders. I should mention a perk about talking accessibility. Coworkers and colleagues started asking me questions about accessibility and giving me the chance to make things right or expand their own knowledge. However, the next thing I know, I was volunteered by one of my coworkers to present about making webinars accessible. So last month in October, I gave that presentation to several state librarians across the United States. And that challenge I was happy to accept, not only because I like learning and talking about accessibility, but it really made me sit down and find out, oh, these will be some of the barriers that people encounter if they're attending a webinar. And these are some ways I can help. Not everything is under my control because it's not my platform that the webinar is on, but slides can be more accessible for people in the way I talk. Also just including notes or transcript with it for added value of content. And the last thing tangible was this proposal for ID 24. Since my challenge had been going on, I said, well, let me throw this out there about my journey. And for one, it'll make me complete my journey because now I have to tell people about it. So that was good. And I'm excited that I got picked to do this. This is great. And I hope it's helpful for other people. So thank you for choosing my talk to be in on this whole series of exciting topics. So now that I've learned things, now that I've read a lot of things and I'm trying to take action, and accessibility is always a thought on my mind when I'm doing web development, I am now on a mission. I can't stop, and I'm determined to finish some of my original to-do list that I had. It starts feeling a little lofty now and disjointed, but there's still things I want to read, projects I want to complete, improvements I want to make to development thinking, to workflow, to style, and still expanding my insight of who's around me and how they're touching our websites even just through the State Library, Archives, and Museum. And I still want to teach and inspire others to do the same. It keeps me learning. And I feel like if I can keep that ripple going, other people can pass it on. There's definitely room for everyone to take part. It's really not as hard or as complicated as I initially made it out to be. It still sometimes feels ambiguous, but it feels like a challenge I can definitely handle. So what would I do different? I'd definitely do this over again, because I feel like I finally tackled this issue in web design that I've been meaning to get to after all these years. Things I would do different. I would blog more about it. If you go to my blog, it's not regular. I think because I spent so much time reading, I didn't feel like there was particular things I could write about, because I was still trying to understand them, or felt like, well, somebody else has already said it anyhow in other places. But even if I just wrote something short or something that was new to me, and continue the education going for other people, I think I would do that again, document more what I learned. I think also that would have slowed me down, gave me time to really reflect on things I was learning and problems that need to be solved, rather than just this pure consumption mode that I was going through of what am I missing? What am I missing? I'd also want to rush less through some of that reading, spending time to blog about it, to contemplate, to make notes for myself at work, to share with others or people on Twitter, or ideas of how to make certain things on our pages better. Again, it was just in a hurry to get so much information I could, finding that magical checklist. It's got to be here somewhere of saying I'm doing these things right and wrong. I'd also harass the experts more. They are out there helping, not sitting on a pedestal. They want others to participate in the teamwork of making the web accessible to all. So when I did ask a few questions, I did receive quick, thoughtful, and curious responses. So I'm not sure why I didn't do that as much. Maybe I didn't feel like I knew what to ask. I'd also try to see where I could plug in and help. The working group I helped initiate and the webinar I gave in October was a great starting point for me. However, I wish I would have found projects on GitHub sooner than later. But thanks to Hacktoberfest, an October coding challenge to contribute to open source coding projects, I did manage to stumble across a few projects that I got to help with after my 100-day journey. So I still feel like there's gaps in my knowledge, so many gaps. I still have more to learn, and I want to learn, but this isn't the end for me. It still feels like only the beginning. So I hope me sharing my journey with you is inspiring enough for you to start your own, if you haven't already. Some of you have been on this journey for many, many years, and those of us who are just starting, thank you. We appreciate the work that you've done. You're paving the way, We have examples to follow and starting points for us to start building with you. For those who haven't started, you feel like I did, where it just felt ambiguous, you didn't know where to start. Maybe it's just too much out there or too much work. Maybe you think it's going to be a lot of work, but you can do this. There are a lot of gray areas, yes. Questions that are always arising. Is this the right thing? Is this the wrong way to do it? There is no real standard checklist that I found to fit all situations. As I found even through other people in their talks today, you have to sit and consider these things. There's no perfect way to do it. What is your situation? And you have to really talk it out. But there are guidelines to follow, WCAG, and there's other generalist checklists that I found on GitHub and other places on the web. And examples. Hayden has his Inclusive Components website that he's been working on. The Accessibility Project, they've got a lot of different components. They've started posting events that you can attend in your area and just having conversations about best practices. These kind of things can get you on your way. You're really not alone. A lot of people have put a lot of work into this. I think the hardest part is just connecting with those resources and connecting with those people so you can ask questions. And as I found, much like my coding challenge, there is a community of people out there talking, especially on Twitter. Just to name a few that I've been stalking personally, but I found so many more since then. Carl Groves, Marcy Sutton, Adrian Roselli, Leonie Watson, and Hayden Pickering. These are some of the ones that I started. Being able to see them tweet often about things that I was interested in that had to do with specific examples that worked. Some places that were doing things wrong, and you really shouldn't be doing this. And it would kind of flag in my mind, oh, I think I've done that before. I need to go look at that. And so the list doesn't stop there. I mean, there are so many people just on Twitter alone that are actively tweeting on these things. And Twitter is really good about recommending more and more to you. So, and also I've been continually finding resources. As I mentioned before, the Accessibility Project on GitHub. You can contribute, or you can see all their different resources that they have and have found. And I just recently read Accessibility for Everyone by Laura Kahlbag. I know I'm saying that wrong, but I absolutely loved her book because I felt like she was bringing the same message in a compact form, helping people realize these are the challenges, but there are humans out there that just experience things differently, and they want to get to the same things that you do. So you have to just keep looking around. People are happy to suggest resources to you, by the way. So do you need to do your own 100-day challenge? Maybe. I don't think that everyone has to commit to that much time. But just remember, though, committing to learning and practicing accessibility means that time for learning and practicing has to take place. So my challenge to you is be an accessibility champion where you are. You don't have to go global, do an international-wide YouTube event. You can just start with your own projects. Start improving pieces in your code to make things better for people, or even little design aspects. Make that color contrast better for people. Also, talk to people around you and share what you're learning. Ask questions, create a ripple effect through communication. Reach out to those experts, ask them questions, ask for direction, ask for resources that you can read, ask how to get involved. Use the accessibility hashtag on Twitter, or even do a search to see what people are talking about. And lastly, I challenge you to do the work. Experts are wonderful, but don't just take my word or anyone else's at face value. Read your country's laws. Read through WCAG. Learn about all of your users and the challenges that they face, and experiment and find solutions that work for you and them. Contribute to accessibility by learning for yourself. So it's time to get started today. Every small step counts. None of us expects you to make it all right by tomorrow, but we would appreciate if you didn't make more of a mess and continue to exclude others. I'll be the first to admit that I'm still in the idealistic stages and have strong opinions about how I think some websites should be coded or designed. However, I also acknowledge that many, if not most, of my own past and present projects are a hot mess. But that's not going to stop me from improving, and I hope the same for you. So that's my story as best as I could sum it up in an hour. Thanks for listening. Please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at click2carney at any time to connect. I really do like learning about web accessibility and really love seeing other people's progress towards the greater good. At this time, I'd not only like to accept questions, but would also love to hear any mentions of your favorite resources that you found helpful in your own journey of learning web accessibility.
Hi, Amy. Thank you very much for that great presentation. I'm often asked what people should do to learn about accessibility, and now I have a video to send them to. So we don't have any questions just yet on Twitter, but as you heard, Amy would like to answer any questions you've got, including asking for any advice that she can give you. So please tweet if you've got any questions. In the meantime, I've got one. You mentioned that if you were to do it again or spend more time on this, you'd want to read some more books. Do you have any on your bookshelf waiting to be read at the moment, or a list of things to buy?
I feel like I have so many on my bookshelf. I never did. I started reading Designing for Progressive Web Enhancement. That seems like an important topic because it makes things better for people of all levels, especially living in Alaska. Rural Alaska can be really hard for people with internet connections, that it breaks up or it's too slow because of the data caps or the pricing that it costs. And so I consider that a part of inclusion, and I'd really like to learn how to better layer things for people. Trying to think what else I'm like part way through. I think it's a lot of those Book Apart books, I've got those all lined up on my Kindle too, for different things that they're just trying to express best practices.
Well, there's another good question. Do you find ebooks a good way to learn, or do you prefer dead tree copies? I know some people for technical books prefer the hard copy. So how do you find the ebooks?
You talk to a lot of librarians, and there's still that nostalgia too of holding the book. But for me, I have a visual impairment. It's not huge, and it doesn't really qualify me as legally blind. But I found I'm torn because I like the nostalgia, and I like web books, especially that have a lot of illustrations and code examples. Kindle falls short on those, but my e-ink reader Kindle is definitely helpful for someone like me, where I can enlarge the print and there's no distractions nearby, and the contrast is great because I don't have a bright screen looking at me too, with like you might see on your iPad. So I lean towards my Kindle because it works the best for me, but sometimes I miss the regular books because I feel like even looking at Laura's accessibility book, you know, she had some color examples of what things might be like for somebody with certain visual impairments like color blindness and stuff, and kind of missed out on that because mine's black and white. But
Yeah, I know what you mean.
The book.
Yeah, I think I do find my my e-ink reader, again, a Kindle, just a really nice reading experience. But sometimes those full color books, especially if you've got syntax highlighted code examples or
Right.
diagrams,
Exactly.
nothing beats them.
Some of those turn out to be images too, and so you go where you have to still enlarge the image on the Kindle for you to read the code, because it turns out it's not actually text but a screenshot or something. And I hate that, because it's like, oh, I can't really see the code. It enlarges so much and then
gets pixelated. So Deborah's just said on Twitter that's a hard question to ask anyone, preferring ebooks or dead tree copies. So if you'd like to answer that question yourself, Deborah, please tweet away.
Controversial.
Yeah. I mean, we'll talk about this for a long while, I think. So on this similar subject, though, what sort of material did you find easier to absorb information from? Did you like sort of small articles or longer books which went into more detail? How did you fit that into your 100 days? Because I'm sure some days you're busier than others, and if you can learn something quickly, that's great. So what sort of balance did you have?
I would definitely, I would try to do some of my reading out of books at night if I could. But yeah, on really busy days, like quick articles would be really nice. And I feel like I found a lot of those, even though I can't think of any on the top of my head. This actually feels like a really good time because more and more people are writing about it online. And so you can really tap into now some of the current web design topic is including this, and you can really see a lot of different articles. So yeah, articles are beneficial, especially for packed schedules. I really feel like even though there was a lot lacking during this 100 days, that if I could have done more tutorials, something more interactive, that would have benefited me more. You can always kind of fit that in. But that's why I like that digital accessibility class online. It was a free course, and they chunked things up. So even though it was a 5-week span, it was easy to jump in, get a few bite-sized pieces, and come right back out and still make progress on it during that time. And they made it in such a way that you didn't have to commit but a few hours a week. So I really applaud them for that because it was helpful. I wish there were more things out there like that.
Yeah, I think if you can make things easy for people to learn, they're far more likely to engage with it.
Right, right. Yeah, just going to W3C's site to read the documentation. There's been so many times I can't count of looking there because it was referred to. I'm like, I don't have time for that. Yeah. I don't think I can absorb this right now.
I can definitely appreciate that. I think Leonie Watson said this much more eloquently than me, but if you can just make a small improvement, that's a good thing. You don't have to fix all the problems in one go. You can just improve every day, just a little bit.
Right. Yeah. And maybe so many of us think that there's so much that we need to do, and if I can't get it right the first time, then what's the use in trying? Or maybe it's just too big of a thing to tackle. But I really liked what Marcy said in her talk earlier today. Was, just mentioning it. It wasn't the point of her talk, but it's like she's like, I remember code being like this with the anchors wrapped around the button, and you think that's just web design. You look back and think, why did I code it that way? And it's just a progress. You just keep going and make it better, or say, well, the next time I do that, I need to do this better, and just acknowledge that your failings, but you keep being better.
Yeah, as you said in your talk, you can spend years learning about JavaScript because you think that's the thing you should put your time into. But I think we're seeing a resurgence of people taking HTML and CSS and getting back to almost the basics of web development and taking it seriously. And I think that's a great thing. It's been a few years since I was working full time as a professional web developer, but I'm really pleased to see people going back to look at HTML and treat it as a serious subject that needs to be learnt and invested in.
Yeah, I hope it really picks up, because I think what I found in different coding tutorials is there is so much focus there. I mean, so many places that I visited on the web of trying to be more of a well-rounded web designer is just like, you're just totally blowing over the basics. Like, yeah, anybody can do HTML and CSS. Let's go.
Yeah,
and so
the evidence is that it's not as easy as people think. You know, as you say, you see these links wrapped in clickable divs and all sorts of things like that, and it still happens. So, yeah. Okay, Amy, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for speaking and being our last presenter of the day. It's not an easy slot to fill, but great. Just a reminder, we are going to be doing a after party session with a few of us from the ID24 team. There is still time to send in your comments, and we're particularly interested in what talks you enjoyed today and why. What were your favorites? And we've still got some more 90-day JAWS licenses to give away. We are going to give one away for this hour to Matt Obi, who's I hope, Matt, that you enjoy watching the ID24 videos tomorrow. And that's a reminder to everyone that these talks are all going to be online on YouTube on the Inclusive Design channel. We've got the full playlist from today, and as soon as we can make it happen, they will be fully captioned and available. But they are available right now, but the captions will come later. And so, just to finish off, a reminder that ID24 is brought to you by the Paciella Group with kind support from Barclays and the Centre for Inclusive Design. And you can find out more about both of those organizations on our website. And if you like this session or any of the sessions today, hit the like button and subscribe to the ID24 channel for future events, streams, and videos. And with that, just once more, thank you very much, Amy Carney.
thank you for having me.